In 1 month of fighting, American soldiers advanced 3,000 yards through a German forest. That's roughly 1.5 casualties for every single yard gained. They called it the Death Factory. Their commanders called it a defeat of the first magnitude. History has called it almost nothing at all. Between September and December 1944, American soldiers were killed or wounded at catastrophic rates fighting for a piece of German woodland that held no strategic value whatsoever. The Hürtgen forest could have been bypassed entirely. Instead, division after division was fed into the same killing ground. This is the story of America's most deliberately forgotten military disaster of World War II, September 1944. The 9th Infantry Division enters the Hürtgen forest with orders to advance through dense woodland toward the Ruhr River. The mission sounds straightforward on paper. The Hürtgen itself was a 50-square-mile triangle of towering fir trees, some reaching 100 feet high, their branches interlocking so tightly that sunlight barely reached the forest floor. Rain seeped through in a constant drizzle until the entire forest floor became a muddy morass. Visibility was sometimes limited to a few yards. Men got lost walking 20 feet from their foxholes. By October 16th, after nearly a month of continuous combat, the 9th Infantry Division had gained exactly 3,000 yards, about 1.7 miles. The cost was 4,500 American casualties. You could walk the distance they gained in less than 20 minutes. It took them a month. The 28th Infantry Division, the Pennsylvania National Guard's Keystone Division, entered the forest on November 2nd. They were fresh and confident. They had landed at Normandy and marched triumphantly through Paris. They were about to be destroyed. Their mission was to capture Schmidt, a village overlooking the Ruhr River dams. To get there, they had to cross the Kall River Gorge via a single trail, a muddy path just 9 feet wide, exactly as wide as a Sherman tank. No one had reconnoitered this trail before the attack. The 112th Infantry Regiment took Wassenack and pushed across the Kall, briefly capturing Schmidt on November 3rd. Then the Germans counterattacked. From Hill 400, a promontory the Americans had inexplicably failed to include as an objective, German observers with Zeiss optics could see every American movement. They directed devastating artillery fire onto the Kall Trail. Tanks trying to negotiate the steep switchbacks threw their tracks and blocked the path. Within hours, the 28th was cut in half. Troops trapped on both sides of the gorge, unable to reinforce, resupply, or evacuate their wounded. At his command post in Rot, Division Commander Major General Norman Dutch Cota received reports of disaster. His regimental commander started down the Kall Trail to reach his men and was found hours later by engineers, physically exhausted, twice wounded by artillery, barely coherent. When the regimental commander walked into Cota's headquarters in that condition, Cota fainted at the sight of him. By November 8th, just 6 days after the attack began, the 28th Division had sustained 6,184 casualties, 45% of its original strength. It was the most costly American division strength attack of the entire war. The 28th Infantry Division had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. In the midst of this slaughter, something extraordinary happened. At the stone bridge over the Kall River, a German medical officer named Captain Gunther Hürtgen negotiated an unofficial ceasefire with the Americans. From November 7th to 12th, while fighting raged elsewhere, German and American medics worked side by side at an improvised aid station, treating wounded soldiers from both armies. The lives of hundreds of American soldiers were saved by German medics during those 5 days. After the war, the governor of Pennsylvania honored Dr. Hürtgen for his humanity. There's another memorial in the Hurtgen Military Cemetery, a stone monument dedicated by veterans of the U.S. 4th Infantry Division to German Lieutenant Friedrich Lengfeld, who died while trying to rescue an American soldier from a minefield. It is the only memorial in a German military cemetery placed by former enemies to honor a German soldier. These moments of shared humanity make the decisions that created this hell even harder to understand. The man responsible for the Hürtgen Forest offensive was Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges, commander of the U.S. First Army. Hodges had dropped out of West Point after failing geometry, enlisted as a private in 1906, and risen through the ranks. He earned 2 Purple Hearts in World War I. He considered them sissy and threw them away. By late 1944, he was exhausted. The scale of his duties overwhelmed him. He made decisions slowly and micromanaged. One historian would later call his handling of the Hürtgen one of the most ill-conceived and unnecessary offensives of the whole Northwest Europe campaign, adding that it was a miracle that he retained Eisenhower's confidence. Hodges was obsessed with protecting his right flank, but the Germans in the forest were set up exclusively for defense. They had no plans to attack. All the Americans needed to do was bypass and encircle the woodland. Not one top-ranking American commander appears to have seriously considered this option. "We had to go into the forest in order to secure our right flank," his Corps Commander Collins said after the war. "If we would have turned loose of the Hürtgen and let the Germans roam there, they could have hit my flank." Major General Truman Thorson, the operations officer, later lamented, "It was a horrible business, the forest. We had the bear by the tail, and we just couldn't turn loose." The Hürtgen was strictly a foot soldiers' fight. Tanks couldn't maneuver. Artillery couldn't observe. Air support was useless under the canopy. The dense woods, ravines, steep ridges, and lack of roads negated every American advantage. It was left to the infantry to decide the battle. And in the final measure, it was guts rather than skill that got anyone through. Besides combat, the soldiers battled exhaustion, hunger, pneumonia, and trench foot. They lacked sufficient boots and winter clothing. Hot meals and a dry place to sleep were almost non-existent. The men in the forward companies spent long nights half frozen in open foxholes with only their uniforms for protection. Many went without hot food for days. The 84th Division alone suffered 500 casualties from trench foot. A British Army officer who observed the Americans reported being surprised by the apparent indifference of the American commanders to the physical needs of their men in winter warfare. In these conditions, hot food once a day is as vital as ammunition. Technical Sergeant George Morgan described it. "The forest up there was a hell of an eerie place to fight. You can't get all of the dead because you can't find them, and they stay there to remind the guys advancing as to what might hit them. You can't get protection. You can't see. Artillery slashes the trees like a scythe. Everything is tangled. Everybody is cold and wet." Then they jump off again, and soon there is only a handful of the old men left. The tree bursts were the special horror of the Hürtgen. German artillery was pre-zeroed on every part of the forest. When shells hit the treetops, they exploded 30 to 40 feet above ground, showering men with steel fragments and jagged wooden splinters. Foxholes provided no protection. The shrapnel rained straight down. Lieutenant George Wilson described an attack east of Grosshow. The first 300 yards reminded him of training exercises. Then the sky fell in and we were in hell. Examining a badly wounded man in the dark woods, a 28th Division medic reported, was like putting your hand in a bucket of wet liver. The 22nd Infantry Regiment landed at Utah Beach on D-Day. They were one of the Army's best units. In 18 days in the Hurtgen, they advanced 6,000 yards at a cost of 2,806 casualties, 1 soldier for every 2 yards gained. The regiment's casualty rate was 86% of its normal strength. Every battalion commander present for duty on November 16th was either killed or wounded by November 18th. Combat fatigue reached epidemic levels. A 1906 Army psychiatric report concluded that there is no such thing as getting used to combat. Each moment of combat imposes a strain so great that men will break down in direct relation to the intensity and duration of their exposure. Lieutenant Paul Fussell, an infantry officer who would later become a noted historian, found that hundreds of soldiers in the Hürtgen shot themselves to escape the line. Self-inflicted wounds became common enough that surgeons learned to recognize them. One new replacement in the 2nd Rangers saw the head of a fellow soldier blown completely off less than 3 feet away. He became speechless, couldn't remember his own name, and couldn't recognize anyone around him. He was one of thousands in at least one infantry battalion. Morale cracked completely. 3 company commanders lost their nerve over a 4-day period. One platoon leader faced arrest for flatly refusing to lead his men into battle. The battle lasted 8 days, the longest single engagement the U.S. Army had fought since Bataan. At least 120,000 American troops cycled through the forest. The campaign absorbed elements of 17 divisions. The 1st and 9th U.S. Armies suffered 57,039 battle casualties along the Siegfried Line through December 15th. They also suffered 71,654 non-battle casualties: trench foot, frostbite, pneumonia, combat exhaustion. The total American casualty count for the campaign approached 140,000 soldiers. German casualties were approximately 28,000. American attackers lost more men than German defenders, a complete inversion of what American material superiority was supposed to guarantee. The stated objectives were never achieved. American forces never crossed the Ruhr River. They never captured the dams. On December 16, 1944, German forces launched the Battle of the Bulge, and the fighting in the Hürtgen ended not through American success, but because the Germans chose to attack elsewhere. It wasn't until February 1945 that the 8th 2nd Airborne finally captured Schmidt, the same ground the 28th had briefly held 3 months earlier. When they did, they found the Kall Gorge still littered with decaying, booby-trapped corpses of 28th Division soldiers. The Germans jammed open the dam floodgates anyway, delaying Allied advances by 2 weeks. The battle has been called an Allied defeat of the first magnitude. Army historian Charles MacDonald, himself a company commander who served there, described it as a misconceived and basically fruitless battle that should have been avoided. Major General James Gavin called it an ice-coated Moloch with an insatiable appetite, and one of the most costly, most unproductive, and most ill-advised battles our Army has ever fought. Ask someone to name 5 famous World War II battles. You'll hear Normandy, Bastogne, Iwo Jima, Midway, Guadalcanal. You won't hear Hurtgen Forest. Compare Tarawa, roughly 3,400 American casualties over 3 days, extensively documented in films and memorials. The Hürtgen produced 10 times the casualties over 4 months. Tarawa fits the story America tells itself about World War II, hard-fought victory against determined enemies. Hurtgen doesn't fit that story. It wasn't a victory at all. The American novelist J.D. Salinger served as an intelligence officer in the Hürtgen. The hardships he faced there would echo through his later work. In the haunting nightmares of Sergeant X in For Esme, with love and squalor. Ernest Hemingway, attached to the 22nd Infantry as a correspondent, coined the phrase that captured the horror, Passchendaele with tree bursts. The soldiers who survived had their own name for it. They called it the Death Factory. Leonard Lamel, an Army lieutenant who survived, summarized it simply: one way or another, they got you. You froze to death, or you got sick, or you got blown to bits. The soldiers called it the Death Factory. The Army called it a defeat of the first magnitude. History has called it almost nothing at all. That silence is the final betrayal, the deliberate forgetting that dishonors their sacrifice by pretending it never happened. The Hürtgen Forest answered the question American military history has tried not to ask. What happens when commanders choose the wrong battle? When institutional pride refuses to admit the mistake? And when the cost of that pride is measured in divisions? The answer is buried in the Hürtgen, under the fir trees, in the silence America chose. The Hürtgen Forest today is one of the best preserved battlefields in Europe. Concrete bunkers and dragon's teeth still litter the area. You can still trace the sunken trenches. The Kall Trail is intact. The area remains heavily mined. Visitors are advised to stay on marked paths. The memorial on the Kall Bridge, the monument to Lieutenant Lengfeld, the 414 graves in the nearby military cemetery. These are what remain of America's longest, bloodiest, and most forgotten battle in the European theater. 33,000 casualties, 4 months of fighting, 0 objectives achieved, and then the deliberate decision to forget it ever happened. The Death Factory produced its harvest, and history looked away. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.